Hello everyone, and welcome back to Think Outside the Board. Today I have for you a first impressions video on Merv, the Heart of the Silk Road. Now I'm going to be changing the format of how I do a first impressions video a little bit, at least in the last section when I'm talking about different things, but I don't want to front load this with a lot of extra information for you, so I'm going to talk about that more at the end of the video in the outro, after you've already seen the new things that I'm doing. So just enjoy the video, and then we'll talk about the new changes after the fact. So Merv, the Heart of the Silk Road is a medium-heavy game for 1 to 4 players. It does have a solo mode, and I've played it, and it's a very, very good solid mode. So it fits in equally well with the rest of the game. It's not one of those games where you're gonna play the game, you're gonna play the solo mode, and you're gonna say, oh, this is awful, and it's not representative of the rest of the game. No, it's good. It's solid. Merv was first published in November 2020. So I'm getting to this first impressions video a little bit late. I'm still doing it anyway, but it is about 6 months late. Throughout gameplay, you're gonna be dealing with many different mechanical systems. Each building type that you can activate has a different mechanical system. And then there are several other different mechanical systems woven into the fabric of the game. So you'll be dealing with all of those mechanical systems that kind of work together and integrate with each other. And in the process of that, you'll be collecting up to 5 types of resource cubes, 1 being wild, up to 4 kinds of spice cards, and up to 2 types of goods, common and rare. And you'll be using those good types along with scrolls to fulfill contracts, so there's kind of a recipe element with that. I think this game is a little bit more fiddly in its mechanics and a little bit more difficult to teach than other games of its same complexity. But not only do you have to understand each mechanical system, there are several kind of additional rules that I think can be easily overlooked. It's a good medium-heavy game, but there's a little more fiddliness in the design and a little bit more to the teach, I think, than some games. So for types of players who kind of don't want to learn the whole game up front and learn as they go, it's going to be problematic for them. That's definitely not the way to learn this game. And people who try to learn and play the game that way, I think are going to miss a bunch of extra rules, and they'll probably have to play it a few times before they get everything. But I'll be talking about that when we look at the game on the table. So this game is designed by Fabio Lopano. He previously designed a game called Kalamala that I have not played, and a game called Ragusa that I own and I think is really good and a really smart design. And Ragusa is a game that I think reinterprets some mechanisms and does things in a different way. So I really like Ragusa, I really like the design of Ragusa, and I was really excited to get a handle on Merv, knowing that it was by the designer of Ragusa. And I am not disappointed. I think Merv is a great game, but it does have a lot going on mechanically, and as I said, we'll talk about that when we get to the table. So the art on this is by Ian O'Toole. Ian O'Toole is one of my favorite artists of all time. He's so good. He does all the Vital Lacerda games. And if I'm listing his games for you, which I am, I would begin with Age of Steam, Black Angel, Clinic Deluxe Edition, CO2 Second Chance, Escape Plan, The Gallerist, Irish Gauge, Kanban EV, Lisboa, Nemo's War Second Edition, On Mars, Pipeline, Ra, Stockpile, Unmatched Cobble and Fog, and Venus Deluxe Edition. And then this game is being published by Osprey Games, and they have previously put out Cryptid, High Society, The King is Dead Second Edition, London Second Edition, The Lost Expedition, Undaunted Normandy, and Martin Wallace's Wildlands series. Now, this is a first impressions video, which means I've only played the game a few times. I have played Merv twice at a 2-player count, and I've played the solo game. I feel like I know it well enough to explain the mechanics to you. So if I do produce a full teach and review at some point in the future, which I would like to, at that point in time, I will have played the game many more times at multiple player counts, so at the 3rd and 4th player counts, and I will do a full teach of the game, teaching everything. Right now, I'm just gonna be showing you the mechanical systems. So let me do that. Let me show you how the game works, how the systems kind of work together, and then I will tell you what I thought about all the aspects of the game. Okay, so this over here is the round track. And this iconography means that at the end of every round, there's gonna be a scoring phase. And at the end of the 2nd and 3rd rounds, before the scoring phase, will be a Mongol invasion phase. And the Mongols are going to come and destroy all of the buildings over here in the central area in the city that aren't either protected by a deployed soldier or by walls on both sides of the city square that they are closer to. And I'll explain more how that works when I talk about the walls. But just know, before each of the scoring phases in the second and third rounds, there will be this Mongol invasion phase, and the Mongols will destroy any buildings that aren't protected, and then those buildings will not score in the subsequent scoring phase. Now over here is the favor track, and players will get rewards throughout the game that will allow them to go up this track. Remember, players can also choose to go up this track whenever they build a building instead of deploying a soldier or taking the building action. And as players go up this track, whenever they pass one of these purple marks with a point amount on it, they will immediately score those points. If they ever hit the end of this track over here, where the influence symbol is, then when they continue to get bumps on this track, they will instead take them on the influence track. Also, during the scoring phase, players will get to score things that they have built in the palace. But in order to do that, they will need to pay a space for every meeple that they're going to score. In fact, just having the meeples there will obligate them to take that many bumps backwards on this track. So if they want to score everything that they have set up with meeples, they'll need to have this disc advanced far enough that they can then go backwards. And then in the future, when they go forward again, they will again score these victory points on this track. So they'll want to be going up this track every round far enough that they can pay for the meeples that they want to score. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about the palace building action. Now over here we have the influence track, which is going to work very similarly to the favor track. However, players will get benefits throughout the game that will allow them to go up that favor track, but they won't ever get those for the influence track. So the ways that they will go up this influence track is whenever they deploy a soldier to protect a building, or whenever they build walls, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about the wall building action. But take note that as they go up this track, it will allow them to fulfill contracts of a higher and higher level. So once they meet or pass this square, they will now be able to fulfill level 1 contracts. When they're on the left side of this, they cannot fulfill those level 1 contracts. If they'd like to fulfill level 2 contracts, then they must go up to this space or pass it. Also, in the beginning of the game, players are only ever allowed to purchase one type of spice card. And we'll talk more about spice cards when we get to the caravansary building action. But just know that if you want to collect more types of spice cards, again, you need to go up this track. So once you are on or have passed this space, you will now be allowed to own 2 different kinds of spice cards. And then as you go up and up this track, that will increase to 3 and to 4. So this central area, this represents the city of Merv. Players have a master meeple that is here. It starts the game here. There are 4 spaces up to 4 players. And as you take turns, you're going to be circuiting the city, going around the perimeter. So for example, if you're playing this, the first player is going to be red, the second player is blue, and in this case I have it set up for a 2-player game. And in 2-player games, you're still going to use a third AI player. So that is this yellow meeple, he represents that. When you're taking your turns throughout the game, each round is going to be 1 circuit of the board. So for the very first turn, the red player would basically say, okay, I'm going to go to one of these 5 rows, and I'll place my meeple there, and I'm going to have to activate a building in that row. So I would place my meeple here, and then let's say I decided to trigger this building, which is the mosque action. So the first thing I do is I build my building, so I'll get an aqua resource, and if I had any other buildings in this row, I would also get those resources. Also, if other players had buildings in this row, they would get resources as well. However, there is a little fiddly rule which says that, let's say a player had already built here, and they built this kind of bonus thing. Then when this gets triggered for an opponent player, they're only going to get the bonus good, they won't get the regular good as well. Now, the player when he builds here couple things are going to happen. First of all, he places his house down. Second of all, he's going to get resources for the house where he just built and any other houses in that row or column. So when we're building here, you're going to be thinking in terms of columns. Later on, when we go to the sides, you'll be thinking in terms of rows. So he'll get that resource, and he'll get resources anywhere else he has buildings. And also any other players that have buildings in that column will also get resources. And then the player can take one of three actions. He can either deploy a soldier here, and that will protect this house from the very next Mongol invasion, but this soldier will go away after the invasion. So it's a one invasion protection only. And when you deploy, you get to bump up one on this influence track. Also, if you want, instead of deploying, you can just decide to take a bump up on the favor track. And the favor track you can no longer see, but it is down here in the palace action. And the favor track is the track that's kind of linked to the influence track. So you can just take a bump up on that. And the third thing that you can do is you can activate the building that you're on. Now there are 6 kinds of buildings. There are different areas for each of them around the board. So I'm going to talk about those separately after we've talked about this movement. Anyway, this player would go here. He has 3 choices then. He can either take the deploy action, in which case he'd take a meeple and he would place it on any building out here, any one of his buildings that doesn't already have a soldier. Also on my turn, because I chose this middle column, I can do one of these camel market actions if I have a camel. I could cover any one of these things and take that resource. So in this case, it would be a white cube. This would give me the ability to deploy another soldier and get another bump on the influence track up here. This would get me a common good down here from the goods supply. And this would allow me to take one action on the mosque track without spending any resource cubes. Now, if one or more of these spaces in the camel market already had a camel on it prior to me doing this, instead of placing a camel to take an action, I could just take the camels, and that would be my camel market action, and I would add those camels to my personal supply. Next up, the blue player would take a move. Let's say he goes here and he decides to do things on this building. And then lastly, the AI player would go. Now, in a 2-player game, the player who went first is going to control the AI player. Generally, you want to place him on a row or column that's going to trigger your buildings because you'll get resources when he does that. In the beginning of the game, there's really nowhere that he can go, so you can place him anywhere. Let's just say I placed him here in the last row, and he would build here. He doesn't get resources, he doesn't get to do actions, but the AI player in the 2-player game is essentially a way of generating resources for yourself and using it to block the other player. Then at the end of this turn, we would go to a new turn. And the way turn order works is that whoever is last, in this case the AI player, is going to go to the last place. However, he has the opportunity, if he has camels, this is like another way you can use camels, to place a camel and skip each space where he does that. So if this AI player has camels, he automatically would use them. And he would go up to the first spot. And now he can't be bumped. He's going to have the first spot. Now the next player, in this case the red player, he now goes to the last spot. Because the last player will always go to the last spot. So he is now going to go to spot number 3. Now if he doesn't want to go last in the next set of turns, he can also spend a camel to advance. So in this case, he might spend a camel so that he can skip this 3rd space, which means there are now 2 camels there. He would place himself in the 2nd space, and the red player will get to keep the camel that he collected from taking that 2 spot. That means the old first player, this player, is now going to have to take the 3rd spot. But when he takes the 3rd spot, he's going to acquire both of the camels that each of the other players placed there. And now the turn order has been reversed. So it's always going to start with the player furthest back in play order, and they'll automatically start from the last place spot, and then they can use camels to advance. So play will go around like this. It'll go around each of the 4 sides. Each player will take a turn. After that, you will go to the next round. And then the second round will go the same way. And then at the end of that round, the Mongols will invade. And any buildings that are either protected by a deployed soldier or don't have walls on both sides of them those buildings will be destroyed. So if you have buildings here on one side of the camel market, a gate will need to be built to protect it. So this building, the only way this building is going to survive is either with a deployed soldier or with a gate. This gate will protect this building and this building. However, if you're wanting to protect a building like this, you need to build walls on the two closest sides. So this building would need a wall having been built there and there to protect it. If this building were over here, for instance, it would need to have a wall here and here built to protect it. Which means that each building is going to have a very specific number of two walls, very unique, to protect it. So if this player had another building here, this wall is only going to partly protect it. For this building to be protected enough to not be destroyed in the Mongol invasion, another wall would need to be built here. So these two walls would now be protecting this building, and these two walls would now be protecting that building. After the Mongol invasion happens, there will be a scoring phase. Now this means that the very first scoring phase of the game, during the round that doesn't have a Mongol invasion, you'll just score immediately. And when players score points, they're going to get points for a few different things. They'll get 1 point for every house, for every building that's still standing after the invasion. If they happen to have any of these tiles, if they've picked them up by going up the mosques track, they will score 3 points for every house they have on a building of that type. So for instance, if you got this one, you're going to want to build a lot of buildings on caravansary spaces, which are these little camel ones like this, or this, or this. So players will score those points as well. And then finally, there are these scoring opportunities, which we'll go over down here when we look at the palace later. But if those things are triggered, players will score points for various items. It could be scrolls, it could be spice cards, it could be rare and common goods, and it could be these spaces, one of these 4 spaces on the mosque track. So if you are up at one of these spaces, you will also score some multiplier of these numbers during the scoring phase. And then at the very end of the game, after you do your normal scoring phase, you will also score points for the camel cards, the caravansary cards. They have camels on them, there are spices, and we will look at those more when we deal with the caravansary section. But that is essentially the game. 3 rounds of going around here and building, with a Mongol invasion after the second and third rounds, and a scoring phase after every round, and then a final scoring at the end of the game that will include the caravansary cards. Now let's look at each different building type so that we can understand how those work. So I will start off with the walls. Since I've already partly explained the walls and how they protect during the Mongol phase, let's talk about how actually building walls works. So if I was on a building that looked like this and had the wall icon, I could take the wall action. And hopefully I have lots of cubes at that point because all of the walls are going to cost cubes. So you can see that gates will cost 3 of any one kind of cube. There are 5 different resource cube colors in the game. There's beige, lavender, orange, aqua, and then white, which is a wild color. So you can always substitute white in for anything else. But if you're just building walls using the main 4 colors, each color has 1 gate available for 3 cubes. Each color has 2 walls available at 1 cube each, and then 2 more walls available at 2 cubes each. So generally when you go into this wall action, if you activate a wall building, you're going to want to have a bunch of cubes so that you can build a bunch of walls, and there's no limit to the number of walls that you can build at one time as long as you have enough cubes. Consequently, the wall action sometimes is good to only do once or twice in the game as long as you've saved up enough cubes to build all the walls you need when you're taking that action. So you're just going to spend as many cubes as you have and you want to spend to build things. So I could spend, 3 orange cubes to build a wall here. I could spend 2 more orange cubes to build these 2 walls, and maybe I'm going to build them here so whatever building here is protected. And then once players use all the walls that are 1 cube each, they're going to be forced to spend 2 cubes each to build walls later in the game, once those are all that's available. But that is how building the walls work. Now, there's one more part to this, which is anytime you build a wall on your own building, you're going to get 1 more bump on this influence track. So that means if I were to have 2 buildings here in the 2 spots that are affected by this gate, if I place that, I'm going to get a 2 influence bump. You actually get more influence bump for helping an opponent to kind of counterbalance for the fact that you are helping your opponent. So let's say that my opponent had a building there. I'm going to get 2 influence for protecting his building. So if I build this gate, I'm now getting 1 influence for my building and 2 influences for his building, so a total of 3. I'm going to bump up 3 points on that influence track. Now, gates are expensive to build, and they only protect a total of 2 spaces. So your influence points you can get is limited. You could get as low as 1 influence point if you yourself only had 1 building there and the other space was empty. If for some reason you decided to build where 2 opponents' buildings are, it's kind of a bad idea because you're helping your opponent, but maybe you really need the influence. That would get you 4 influence, 2 for each of the opponent's buildings. So building a gate will get you, well, it'll get you 0 to 4 points. I don't know why you'd want to build where there's nothing, but you could be doing that in preparation maybe for placing a building later and hoping that no one else takes it. So building a gate will get you somewhere between 0 and 4 points on this influence track. So if I'm building these 2 walls, which will actually cost me less cubes to build than the gate, this wall is going to affect up to 2 spaces, right? Because this wall potentially protects this space and this space. Meanwhile, let's say I'm building this to protect this yellow building. This wall will be affected by this space and this space. So I have built 2 walls for 2 cubes instead of a gate for 3 cubes. So it's cheaper for me to build this. And the total number of spaces protected by these 2 walls is 1, 2. This one again, so that's 3, and this one 4. I mean, again, you could always build these walls and get no influence bumps, right? If nothing was there. But if he had that there, he's going to get 1 point for building these 2 walls. If he has 3 domiciles here, he's going to get 2 points for building this wall, 1 for protecting that. And then he'll also get 2 influence points for building this wall. So he'll get 1 for this and this. Now, again, if for some reason all of these buildings were opponents' buildings, that probably wouldn't be the case. There might be a mix. Maybe you have a building in here and there are some opponents' buildings, so you're going to get a mix of points. But let's just take the extreme example. If all 3 of these buildings were opponents' buildings, building this wall will get you 2 4 influence points, but building this wall will get you another 2 and another 4 for these. So it's a total of 8 points that I'd be getting for building these 2 walls. So you could build a couple of walls around a few opponents' buildings, and all of a sudden you are racing up this influence track. And whether you're building it for you or for opponents, this is one really good way to race up that influence track. I mean, you can also go up by deploying soldiers, but each soldier only gets you a 1-point bump. And this is something that my fiance and I, we missed this the first time out. So we were building walls, but we weren't also getting the influence points for them. And this is what I mean by there being a lot of kind of extra little fiddly rules in this game. It's not enough that each system kind of works. So you've got the wall building system with the cubes, but then on top of it, you've also got this kind of influence bonus system. And there's a lot of that stuff in this game where there are these little extra fiddly rules in each action, and you need to know what they all are to integrate them together. But a lot of those little extra fiddly rules are things that might not be obvious upon a first play or a first learn. So let's talk about the palace actions next. That's another building type you can go to. It's the one with this Sultan's hat on it. So whenever you go to a building with that, you're going to be taking a palace action, and the palace actions kind of stack resource-wise throughout the entire game. So you can take as many palace actions as you want when you go there. You just need to have as many resource cubes as possible to take those actions. So your very first placement anywhere here during the game will cost you 1 cube of that type. So let's say I've already got a bunch of scrolls and I'm going to want to score a point for every scroll that I have during the scoring phase. I would pay 1 purple cube, because that's the cube type for the scroll area, and I would place my meeple there. And he becomes a courtier, as opposed to when I place him on a building, he becomes a soldier. When he goes in here, though, that means that at the scoring phase, I will then score 1 point for every scroll that I have. Now, if I have a lot of scrolls and I really want to score highly, maybe I place another one, which will then score me 2 points for every skull that I have. But in order to do that, in order to make a second placement, I need to pay 2 resources for that second meeple. So the first one's going to cost me 1 purple. The second one will cost me 2 purples. Now, let's say I also have a lot of spice cards, and I want to score for that. I'm going to place a guy here. But this continues to stack. It's not for any one area. So for me to place a third meeple here, I'm now going to need to pay 3 aqua cubes to place a third meeple there. And it's going to go up each time you place a meeple. It does not reset at the end of your action. So if I were to do this again later in the game, my next meeple that I place is going to cost me 4 cubes wherever I place it. So it gets increasingly expensive. And what this track does is during that scoring phase at the end of each round, so at the end of the first, second, and third rounds, you are going to score points for each of those resources you have. So meeples in this area will score you 1 point for each scroll that you have. Meeples in this area will score you 1 point for each spice card that you have from the caravansary. Meeples over here will score you a point for every good that you have, and we'll talk about these later, but these are gotten over here using this market action. And lastly, meeples over here will score you points if you've gotten up to this section of the mosque track, and it'll score you a multiplier of 1 based on whatever point you are at. And whenever you take an action down here, the first one there is going to want to take the space on the left because that will also give them a bump on that favor track. So this is the palace down here. Over here you can fully see this area, the market. So I'll talk about this market as well. When you go to this type of building with these beans in here in the market, you are able to place some of your player discs, and this is only limited by the kinds of cubes that you have. So the first time I go here, I'm going to choose some place to place my disc that is in the city of Merv, that is in one of these areas with a camel. And I will place there, and I will get to keep the camel. Now, later on, players can also build little kind of stalls in the same area. They just won't get the bonus that the player who went there first got. So for the little cities here selling the common goods, you'll always get a camel. If you're going to one of these areas on the outskirts, you will get the favor that's printed on it. And again, only the first player there will do that. So if I've placed this, I am now eligible to spend an orange cube to get a peach. And I can only do that once per action. So I can't get like 6 peaches. I can only get 1 peach each time I go to the market. But if I have extra camels on me, I can use those camels to help give me access to buy other things. So I would place a camel down here, and then that now would thematically represent me riding a camel over to this area. And I would also need these goods, so I want to make sure that I had them when I placed this here, but I would then pay those goods, and I would also get one of these sapphires, which is a rare good. And I could do this as many times as I have camels. I can only get each type of good once, but like if I wanted to go here to the center of the city, I could place a camel there, and now I can trade in any of these 3 other places and spend, an aqua cube to get some grapes, a beige cube to get some pistachios, or a purple cube to get some of these swords. Now, if I had even more camels, I could say place another camel over here, which now links me over here. And then if I had a purple and orange cube to spend, I would also get one of these sheets of cloth. So you are kind of only limited to how many goods that you can get here when you go to the market by the number of cubes you have and the number of camels that you can spend to link. Now, in the future when I go here, all the camels will be gone, and I can build somewhere else. So like let's say during that turn, I decided to build my stall here. I got this other camel, and I got to spend a beige cube to get a pistachio. Since I had previously built a stall here, I will automatically just get to trade an orange for the peach. I can activate any previously built stalls here to get the goods before I get to the point where I have to use camels to connect to other stalls where I don't have discs built. Then at the very end, when you are done with this, if you've placed camels over here, the camels will then migrate and go over to these caravansary cards starting from the far end. And I will explain why when we talk about the caravansary market. But before we do that, let's go back and talk about the mosque track, which is over here on this side of the board. So the Mosque track always starts at the bottom with these camels. And again, this is another situation of when you go to the Mosque track, you are only limited by how far you can go up at once by the number of cube resources that you have. So this is another situation where you're probably going to want to have as many cubes as possible going into this. But again, you will take a player disc, you will choose a column here, you will pay the cost to initially go up in this column. So if I wanted to go in this middle one, it's going to cost me a purple. So I'll go up here and I will take a camel as my reward. And then you can just kind of keep progressing up this as long as you have resources. And in the future, if you go back to the mosque again, you can continue up on the same track wherever you left off from. So if I have an aqua cube, for instance, I can go up to the next spot. This one will get me a white cube. The white cubes I can place on my buildings, so I, for instance, could place it here. Although if I was the red player, there is a rule with both the white cubes and these bonus cubes where you can't have it on a building where you also have a soldier. So if I was the red player and I chose to put this white cube over this building because I want this building to produce white instead of aqua, I've done that, but the soldier then goes away, which means that buildings where you've placed these white cubes or these bonus cubes will never be able to be protected by soldiers during the Mongol invasion. If you want to protect these buildings, you're going to have to use gates and walls. But that would be my reward for this spot. If I went up again, I'm going to get a bump on this favor track down here. If I went up again, I'm going to get one of these bonus cubes. So there's one of each kind. I can choose the one that I take, and I will build it on a building. I'll essentially place it over here because it stops the soldier from being able to be built. But then when this building gets triggered in the future, instead of just generating a beige, it's going to generate a beige and an aqua cube. If I keep going up to here, I'm going to get to select one of these 4 tiles, which will score 3 points per building type during the scoring phase. So I'm going to want to select the tile that matches the building type that I have the most of. And I would just take that into my inventory and it would trigger every scoring phase. If I go up to this spot, I get to deploy a soldier to one of my buildings and get the extra bump on this influence track up here. If I go up to this space, I'm going to get to do a palace action down here for free. So this is a really good place to trigger late in the game after you've already placed a bunch of meeples, and the next one would be a very expensive placement. You can go up here and get that for free. This will also score me 1 point during any of the scoring phases as long as I have meeples down here in this section. Now if I go up to this, I'm going to start scoring 2 points for each scoring phase for each meeple I have down here. But the reward for this one is going to be another bump on this favor track. And on the favor track, whenever you pass any of these numbers, you're going to score that many points. That also means that when you pay spaces to score on these tracks during the scoring phase, it may go back and you may get to re-trigger these points again later in the game as you advance up here again. If I go up to this space on this track, I'm going to get to do a wall action and I'm going to get to build it for free, but I only get to do 1, which means that it's really good to build a gate here because the gate normally costs 3. Getting to build a gate for free will be a 3 resource cube savings, whereas if you built a wall, it might only be a 1 or 2 resource cube saving. And then the last thing that you can do here, you now will be eligible to score any buildings that you have during the scoring phase that are mosque buildings for 4 points each. And I think you'll see that there are no mosque tiles among these. So essentially you could be taking one of these tiles as you go up, and then you'd also score the mosque buildings. So you could be scoring up to 2 different buildings for additional points during those scoring phases. So that's the mosque action there. All right, now the 5th kind of building that you can build is over here. It's the caravansary. And this is essentially the spice card market. You can tell from the iconography here that you're going to need to spend cubes for every spice card you get, and each cube you use must be the same color. And then there are 4 types of spices. You are limited to what type of spice you can get by where you are on that influence track. So you might only be able to buy 1 type of spice card. There are 4. So here you can see this is cinnamon, this is ginger, this is juniper, I believe, and this is pepper. Now the last rule about taking these caravansary cards is that you can only take a card that has a camel on it, like these 2 cards here, or the card directly in front of them. But you can also place camels. So for instance, if I had extra camels and I really wanted to get to, like, let's say this pepper card, I could place a couple of camels on those cards, and now I get to take this pepper card. But I need to spend a cube to do it, so maybe I'm spending a purple cube. And if I decide to spend purple, then I can only take cards this action spending purple cubes, or wild. There are white cubes which are wild, so I could spend those as well. But the number of cards that I take is going to be limited by the number of spice cards that I can take and the number of cubes that I have of one color. So I could take this pepper card. Let's say I take the pepper card. Now I'm able to take any of these 4 cards plus this. So let's say I take this juniper card, and now I'd be able to take this. But maybe I want to take some of the cards with camels because I want the camels. So I could take this card, I could take this card. So doing that would have required me to pay 4 cubes, all of the same color or wild. And then after I'm done, these would shift down and this kind of row of 8 cards would be refilled. So it doesn't refill while you're taking the action. You can't take the action and then have more cards come out. You're only going to be able to buy a maximum of 8 cards, but to do that, you would have to have 8 cubes. Now there are 4 different kinds of spice cards, of caravansary cards. And again, if you want all 4, you need to go pretty high up on that influence track. But when you take each of these cards, it's going to give you a bonus. So, and it's always for 2. So every time you get 2 of a certain type of card, you're going to get a bonus. So for the black pepper, every time you get 2 cards, you're going to take one of those white cube tiles from over in the mosque track, and you're going to place it on a building. Whenever you get 2 cinnamons, you're going to get a bonus white cube. Whenever you get 2 junipers, you will get to advance 1 space on the favor track. And whenever you get 2 gingers, you're going to deploy a soldier. So when you're buying these spice cards, you're ideally probably going to want to get 2 of each kind because that will give you the little bonuses. However, at the end of the game, they're going to score bonuses for all the cards you have that are not the same. So if I wanted to have a set that would give me 10 points, I need to have 1 of each kind of spice type. So a ginger, a pepper, a cinnamon, and a juniper. So 1 of each of those cards would score me 10 points at the end of the game. If I had extra cards beyond that, I'm then building additional sets. So if I had a second set with 3 different cards and 3 different spices, that would earn me 6. And let's say I had a lot of peppers. So let's say I had 2 more peppers left over. Each pepper would basically start its own set and give me just 1 point. But that means that you are using these cards in the game to generate bonuses, and you may be scoring for every spice card that you have during the scoring phase if you have this part activated, and then at the end of the game you'll be scoring in sets. Just that one time at the end game phase. All right, there's 1 building left to do, and it is the library, and it's kind of low down here, so let's take a look at it. So the library is where you go to get scrolls. And we're going to talk about contract cards last, but you will need scrolls from the library here, and you will need the rare and common goods that you acquire from the market over here. And then you'll be able to use those scrolls and those goods together to fulfill contract cards. But anytime you go to a library, you're going to be able to take the library action, which will net you a scroll for every different kind of cube that you spend up to 4. So you can get 4 scrolls per library action. There are also bonuses associated with the scrolls. So the first time you get 2 scrolls, you're going to take this bonus. Once you have a total of 4 scrolls, you'll get this. Once you've acquired 6 scrolls, you'll get that. And once you acquired 8 scrolls, you'll get a bonus token here. Now, the bonus tokens are a little different. So for the 2 scroll reward, you're going to get to choose a tile that will forever give you a 1 cube bonus when you're doing one of these 4 things. So for instance, on the mosque, you'll get to go up the mosque track and you'll get to pay 1 less cube. And that's 1 less cube for that turn. So you obviously don't get to give yourself a 1 cube credit for every single spot on the track because that would make most of them free. But you'll just have 1 cube discount for that action. This will give you a 1 cube discount whenever you take that palace action, which can help later in the game when the meeples that you're putting out here start to be very expensive. This will cost you 1 cube discount for the caravansary action, which means you'll get to take 1 of the cards for free. And this will give you a 1 cube discount for the market action, so you'll have to spend 1 less cube when you're acquiring these goods. Now, once you have 4 scrolls, you're going to get to take one of these. These will designate 1 color cube that will also become a wild. So from that point on in the game, let's say you took this one, white is now wild for you, and aqua is now wild for you as well. The reward for having 6 scrolls allows you to choose one of these building types. This allows you to do the building action on it instantly. That's what the little lightning bolt is for, and generally for free. So for this one, you're going to get to do it without paying any cost. No cost for that one, no cost for that one. And you only get to do it 1 time. That's why it says once. And then the market action, you're just going to get to take an extra good. And then finally, for the bonus tiles, once you have gotten 8 scrolls, you have several things to choose from, which are all just instant actions. So this will boost you twice on the favor track down here. This will let you deploy 2 soldiers, which will also give you 2 bumps on the influence track. This will give you 1 of each, and this one will just score you 8 points instantly. Finally, let's talk about these contracts. So these contracts can be fulfilled whenever you want to in the game. It's just a bonus action. And to fulfill any of them, you need to spend 1 cube, any kind of cube, and the scrolls and resources depicted. So again, the scrolls are going to come from the library. The resources are going to come from that market action where you're placing your discs and maybe some camels and you're buying rare and common goods. So rare goods are the brown ones that look like gems and things, and the common goods are the kind of blue-green ones that have more kind of normal supplies, like peaches. So on your turn, if you have advanced beyond any of these 3 areas, the 1, 2, or 3, you are then eligible to fulfill contracts from the 1 area, the 2 area, or the 3 area. And to fulfill a contract, you need to just discard a cube of any color and then have the matching goods, which you're just going to kind of place over it. And you'll take the card, you'll score the victory points on it immediately. So this is 12. So if you fulfill a bunch of contract cards, you're going to score a lot of points. And then every contract card also has something over here under the points that is a bonus action. So for this one, you would get to move up on the favor track. There are also deploy soldiers, but it's either deploying soldiers or moving up on the favor track. And in general, the highest point cards are on top for each category, and the smaller point cards are in the bottoms. So you're always going to want to fulfill whatever contract you are eligible to fulfill that has the goods for you to fulfill it. Now, you could play a waiting game, and you could say, well, I'm going to wait until later in the game when I'm really high up on this track, and then I can fulfill 3s. However, you never know. Someone else could end up fulfilling the contracts that you want in the meantime. So there is a little bit of a game here in, do I fulfill stuff early on when I know I can do it, or do I wait until the end of the game when I have more stuff and I can fulfill bigger things, hoping that they're still there and they haven't gone away? So there's a lot of different systems in the game. There's a lot of systems that kind of play off each other. I mentioned at the top that the getting influence for placing on the walls was something that had escaped us for the first game. I think there can also be some confusion about these tiles because, as I mentioned before, you're either getting a white tile or a bonus tile or a soldier on a building. You can only have one of those 3. And if you place one of these bonus tiles on the building, then the soldier goes away. So that's something to be aware of. Another little fiddly rule is when you are placing buildings and triggering other buildings that you have, if you're triggering your building, you're going to get both kinds of resources. But if you're triggering an enemy's building, they will only get the bonus resource. They won't also get the base resource. Now, if they don't have the bonus on there, sure, yeah, now they'll get the base resource. But if they have that on there, they're just going to get the bonus and not the base. It's not a complicated rule, but it's an extra little fiddly rule that players might tend to forget. Another little fiddly rule over here in the market, which is now off camera, but it's over here, and that is the rule where you can kind of place camels to be able to go to other spaces. That's just another little fiddly rule that people need to remember. You're not just getting resources on the places that you have this. You can link to other places, put camels down, and then you'll be able to pay the cubes to get those resources as well. And then at the end of that action, these camels that had been placed to link things will come over and go on the caravansary cards, creating more opportunities to acquire camels when buying caravansary cards. But those are the mechanics of Merv as quickly and completely as I could explain them to you. Hopefully they all make sense, and it will give you a understanding of the mechanics and the game in general and how they kind of work together. Okay, so for these first impressions videos, I used to talk a little bit more stream of consciousness about my thoughts, and I may eventually go back to that. But for right now, I'm going to be using a more truncated version of what I'll be using for my longer teach and review videos. So there's a bunch of points I'm going to hit, what I think are all the salient points that you may need to know as someone considering buying the game. I will say that Merv takes place over 3 rounds, and in each round, every player is going to take essentially 4 actions. So you'll be taking 12 actions over the course of the game. Now, some of those actions can get kind of complicated and can go on and involve a lot of different things. And how quickly you play is largely going to be based upon how well you know the game. So I think after you play it a few times and you kind of know the different actions, you can be planning ahead a little bit better, as with most games. And you'll also know more of what's involved in each action, and you'll be thinking about that ahead of time. So I'm going to say that as you become more proficient with the game, you can probably play it in 30 to 45 minutes per player. So for instance, a 2-player game, you could probably, if everyone's pretty proficient, squeak it in an hour. Might take an hour and a half. So that would mean that a 4-player game, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. And that's if everybody's kind of knows what they're doing and is playing well. I think it could double on a first play. So for a 2-player game, the first time out, it could take you 3 hours. 4-player game could take 6. Granted, 6 is a long game, but there is a lot of stuff going on. It kind of just depends how quickly people play. But I think that 4-player game will get down to 3 hours, maybe even 2, once people kind of know what they're doing and can take quicker turns. Now, I've already mentioned that the player count is for 1 to 4 players, and the solo game is good. It's not one of these games where the solo game is kind of tacked on and it doesn't really play as well as other modes. I feel that the solo mode does stand along the multiplayer game, at least as far as I've seen it. One thing to be aware of is that when you're playing a 2-player game, you will have a dummy AI player, so there'll be kind of a 3rd player in your 2-player game. When you do the solo game, you will also have 3 players in your game. So there still will be a dummy AI player, but there will also be sort of a more active AI bot. And sometimes you or that AI bot will control that 3rd AI player. So in a solo game, you essentially will have 2 different opponents, one who is very active in the way that they take their turns and one that is much more passive and can be controlled by the more active player. It's interesting. It works really well. I just wanted to communicate that in case there was some element of that someone might have misgivings about. But it plays well, but just know that that is how it plays. Next, let's talk about the longevity of the game. So the replayability, how long it's going to last in your collection. I think this is one of those games that has so many mechanical systems that integrate together and has a lot of interplay between the systems that it creates a lot of variability. And as a result of that, I think this game will have a long shelf life. I think it will play well for a long period of time. I think you'll get lots and lots of games out of this. I think this is probably good for somewhere in the hundreds of games at least, if you so choose to play it that much. There's only 1 board, so there's not different boards. However, the main grid that you're building tiles on is a group of 25 modular tiles, so that will change every time. There's also no campaign for this game. There's no legacy elements, anything like that. So it is just kind of your standard Euro game. And as I mentioned at the top, the systems are kind of complex. There's kind of some interplay between them, which can make decision-making kind of more fiddly and involve more little extra things to think about. I think that means there'll be a little bit of a ramp up. I don't think everyone will feel like they know that they're playing correctly and competently until they've played it through 2 or 3 times. So there will be a little bit of a hurdle, I think, in the beginning, especially if you are teaching the game to newer players. But once people know the game, I think there are a lot of good choices and the game has long legs. As far as price value of the game goes, I just did a quick check on BoardGameAtlas.com, which is a great little website tool. You should check it out, but it helps you find the cheapest prices for games. It's the prices that I'm seeing for Merv, not including shipping, obviously, are $45 to $50. So that's your price range for the game. That feels pretty standard with a retail Euro to me. It's not, this big box, super deluxe, kind of like a Lacerda Eagle Griffin game where you're paying $100 to $120. It's half that. It's, $50 kind of at the ceiling. Now, component-wise, it's got good components. It's got a lot of wooden components, but they're not silkscreened or anything like that. They're just bare-bone wooden components that are well-produced. So you're gonna have resource cubes, 5 different colors. You're gonna have 4 different player colors. So those will include little wooden discs that you'll put out for when you take different actions. There are meeples and there are buildings that you build. There are also these wall pieces that you're gonna be placing around the city, and those are wooden as well. And there are gates and there are walls, and they each look a little bit different. There are also camels, these little wooden camels, and those are wooden pieces. I actually really like the design on them. They're kind of intricately laser cut, I think, and they're just kind of fun to hold and put down because they have like striations and some texture to their design, so they're fun to handle. The board is by Ian O'Toole, and Ian O'Toole is one of my favorite artists. I mean, he did the card art as well. It's one of my maybe least favorite Ian O'Toole boards. And the reason for that, and I'm gonna get into theming now as I talk about this as well, but the theming of the game is that it's taking place during this great city of Merv, and it was the biggest city of the world at the time until it was crushed by the Mongols. And so the whole city ended up being sacked by Mongol invasions, and then it was no longer the largest city in the world. It was kind of the end of the heights of Merv. And that's when this game takes place. It takes place when the city is getting built up and kind of anticipating these Mongol invasions. And that's what the game is depicting, is players trying to build and keep the city constructed amongst these Mongol invasions. So that is the theme of the game, and it is sort of a trading game, city construction and trading game set with kind of within that theme. Now, I've seen this kind of theme before where you have an invading force coming in and attacking once at the end of every round. I've seen that in games like Game of Thrones, the board game. I've seen that in Troyes. I've also seen that in Kingsburg. And in fact, there's a kind of once around combat system in Dune Imperium, but that's more the players kind of preparing for the combat and doing things to be in the combat rather than just trying to take defensive measures to stave off this invasion. So there is that element to the game and to the theme. And the board is essentially this big kind of board of the city in the middle and then kind of all of these mechanical systems. Now, Ian O'Toole can have very intricate, busy art, and that's kind of what I like about him. And when he does that art in Lacerda games, it's really cool because everything is tied to thematics. And so you'll do things, and then as you're playing the game and you're playing, more plays of the game over time, and you become more familiar with the game, you'll see these corresponding elements between the art and the theme of the game, and you'll have kind of all these aha moments. Now, I'm not seeing that so much in Merv. There's a lot of mechanics in the game, there are tracks and things like that, and so the board is just very busy. And I think rather than tying together the theme and the gameplay like a lot of his designs do, there is more a level of busyness in the art design here and the graphic design that needs to be overcome a little bit by the players. I think the first couple times that you play this game, and I say this as someone who likes Ian O'Toole's art, but I think the first couple times you play this game, looking at the board and looking at the art, it's going to be a little bit busy for your eyes. At least it was for mine, and a little bit more difficult to kind of make sense of. After you play it more, you'll kind of work it out, but it doesn't have so many of those kind of ties between theme and design that kind of help make those connections. I think the onus is on the players a little bit more in this design to make sense of it. And that is partly because of like all these grab bags of mechanics. And in that sense, it reminds me a little bit of a game like Gugong, which has a bunch of different mechanics, and you're trying to kind of work them all together and find the synchronicities between the systems. So I like the art in this, but I think in some ways it can be a bit of a barrier to entry when you're first playing the game because of its busyness. And I think in general, that's my point about the theme as well. While they tell us the theme is there, it doesn't really jump off the board at you. It's something that if you understand, it will work with the gameplay, but the theme of this one isn't going to be, I think, grabbing people from afar. It looks like a trading Euro game with a little bit of table presence because of the modular tiles and the walls, but it's not a theme that's gonna like drag people in. But I think for what it is and how the game plays and the value that you'll get out of the game, I think being priced as this kind of retail Euro, you know, half the price of these more expensive deluxe type Euros, I think is at a really good price point. And I think it offers a lot of game for that price. So if that's something that you're worried about, I'd say full speed ahead. This is a good value for the dollar on this one, and the game will have legs. Now, in terms of what you're doing in the game, and I call this the gameplay loop, and my feeling with the gameplay loop is that if you like what a game is doing, if you like that central gameplay loop, you're gonna like the game because that's what you're doing over and over again. And if you don't like that central gameplay loop, you're never gonna like the game at all unless it happens to be like one of the best of its genre, and it's so good that it sucks you in anyway for other reasons. But the gameplay loop to me is always central to whether or not you're going to like the game. And in this game, the gameplay loop is going around that main modular board and choosing a row or column, placing your meeple, taking one of several actions for that tile, whether it is the deploy action with a soldier that you can do on anything, whether it's going up that favor track that you can do with any building, or whether it's taking the specific building action on the building. And there are 6 different building actions that you can take, plus there are the bonus actions of fulfilling contracts. So you're gonna be dealing with the interplay of all those mechanics. And for me, this is something that I like. This is this kind of medium heavy to heavy Euro mesh of mechanical systems. And this one does involve city building. It does involve going up tracks. It does involve, you know, fulfilling those contracts with sort of recipes and resources. So that's the gameplay loop, is kind of involving yourself with all these mechanical systems and the way that they work together. So if your mind likes those kinds of puzzly systems found in a lot of kind of medium heavy and heavy games, that's what's here. That's the gameplay loop. And then in terms of a round system, it is going through 3 rounds of this, 2 of which will have Mongol invasions. And then at the end of each of the 3 rounds, including the first one where there is no invasion, you will have a scoring phase. And then at the very end of the game, you will also score your set collections of spice cards. And for me, I think I've mentioned that it took a play or two to really kind of get all of the mechanics, you know, fully in our heads. But having done that, it's a very enjoyable game for me. It's a lot of fun. And I think in the beginning, there was a little bit of a barrier to entry to me just because of the fiddliness and the mechanics and things like that, and the theme not really coming through. So you're dealing more with manipulating mechanical systems and getting a hold on those systems. But once you do that, once you understand that, the game is a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun for people who enjoy interacting with those systems and playing with them together. And I found it very, very enjoyable. And it's a game that I know I'll be able to come back to with a lot of my heavier gamer friends again and again. And I think many or most of them are also going to really enjoy the game systems. But I also think that they're going to think that the theme is, Now, just mentioning production quality, this goes back to what I was saying about the components. It's good. It's good for a retail game, but they have not gone to the level of screen printing anything. They're just dealing with wood components. The cards and everything, I feel like those are good quality. The tiles that you put out are good quality. The quality of everything is good. Like, it may not be screen printed and shiny, and there may not be minis and components on that level, but for what they're doing with the cards and the tiles and the wooden components, everything is very, very well made and sturdy. And these components should last over time. Now, the strength of the game It's hard for me to point to any one thing with this game because I think the strengths of this game have to do with the overall design. So the strengths to me are the different systems. And I'm kind of, in my head, I think of each different building type as a different mechanical system. So that's 6 systems. Plus you've got the system of how you kind of go around the central area and the way that you can use camels to jump ahead in turn order. So that's kind of a whole other mechanical system. Then you've got the contracts and the recipes that you use to fulfill those. I suppose you could think of it as a separate system with the way the caravansary cards score at the end with their version of set collection. So you're going to be using one aspect of those caravansary cards to get bonuses as you're collecting them. And then at the very, very end of the game, you're going to have another system for those cards, which is that they will score based on set collection for every different card that you have. So you're going to want to be getting duplicates of cards early in the game to get their bonuses, but then at the end of the game, you're going to want to have as many full sets of different cards as you can to score pure points. And then of course you've got the other 2 tracks going on, the favor and the influence track, and the way that they kind of play off each other. So when you get to the max of one track, you'll get to start going up the other track instead of the first track when you continue up that track, so they kind of bleed over into each other. Going up that influence track is also the thing that will be able to trigger you to buy more types of spice cards and be able to fulfill higher levels of contract cards. And then remember also that building the walls will get you influence. So that'll help you go up the influence track so that you can do those things, as will deploying soldiers. So there's a lot of interplay between all the systems. And as a heavier gamer, like that's my bread and butter. That's what I like. I like delving into different systems like that, exploring them, figuring out how to kind of tweak them and maximize them, and how they work together, and how you can get even bigger bonuses when you kind of play them together. There's also palace building. That is also how you set up scoring situations. So even though it's its own mechanical system, it's going to have effects in all 3 scoring systems, and kind of how you set that up to score and how you set yourself up on the favor track to be able to score. So there's just a lot of mechanical systems, and I really like them, and I like the way they kind of all fit together and work together. And to me, that is the strength of the game. I also really like the art just because it's Tools art. So for me, that's a strength of the game, even though I think it can be a weakness because it's very, very busy. And at times, it could make some players have some difficulty in understanding some of the systems just because that art can be so busy in places. Now, this could be a potential weakness. I'm not really sure how, as I play the game more, I will think about this part, but in the middle of that modular board, there is something called a camel market. So whenever you build on the middle row or the middle column, you can also trigger the camel market. That may mean taking a camel if you have one and placing it on one of the 4 icons in the camel market and then getting that for free, kind of like a bonus action. Or you could, if there are a bunch of camels on that camel market, retrieve the camels and then you'll have more camels. So I think as you're playing, it feels to me like that the game really incentivizes you to build on that middle row or the middle column because you're also getting those bonus camel market actions. And I think I'm going to have to watch as I play the game more and more how many other gamers kind of understand that and how the game becomes a kind of cutthroat race for the middle row and the middle column. Now, I don't know if these are so much strengths of the game, but there's also some elements of strategy I've been seeing, and part of that has to do with the turn order, so how you're manipulating the turn order and spending camels to do that. And I like the way that the game gives you the opportunity to do that, to change up the turn order, but you need camels to do that. And when you do that, you're going to give your opponents camels, so then they'll have the opportunity to do that in the future, or to use those camels in other mechanical systems on the board that also use the camel. But I do like the ability to kind of change up the turn order. And in a 2-player game, whoever is first player is going to be controlling the AI player, and placing that AI player will also determine who gets some bonus resources and what you're blocking up. So going first and continuing to go first will continue to give you control of that AI player, which gives you even more of an advantage because not only are you taking your turns, you're getting to control this third player, which can give you more benefits and give your opponents more hindrances. So there is definitely a tug of war for control of that third player, and there should be, but just know in a two-player game that is there. That is going to be a part of gameplay. Another huge strategy in the game is how you go up on those favor and those influence tracks, because if you want to be buying more types of spice for the camels, for the immediate bonuses and the endgame scoring, or if you want to fulfill contracts. And those two systems are probably the biggest way to get points in the game. If you get many full sets of camels, you're going to get a lot of endgame points, and fulfilling contracts can score you a lot of points. I think probably the most points in the game. So for both of those, you're going to be wanting to go up the influence track, and to do that, you're either going to be needing to build walls or deploy soldiers. So the strategy by which you do that, and when you choose to deploy soldiers instead of taking building actions, there are a lot of good decisions to be made in that. And that's, again, something else that I like in terms of strategies for players to be thinking about and how much they want to be pursuing each kind of strategy. So for me, mainly, the strengths of the game are all of the systems, the intricate ways they work together, and the heaviness of the game. So if you're a heavy board gamer, you should like it, I think. The weaknesses really are the busyness of the board, the barrier to entry, and the fact that a lot of those mechanical systems do have a lot of little extra fiddly rules. So if you're a lighter gamer who maybe wants to get into heavier games, you may want to play some other heavier games first before diving into this one, just because there's a lot of extra fiddliness in the game design and rules in this one. But those are the kind of the main strengths and weaknesses of the game. And so I think having seen the game, having looked at the components, and kind of understanding those aspects of the gameplay, I think you should have a pretty good indicator of whether or not this is going to be a game for you. Now for me, I really like the game. It's going to be staying in my collection for the long term. I'll need to see what other gamers that I play with, how they like it, especially at 3 and 4 player counts, but it feels like a keeper to me. It definitely feels like it has the potential to be an evergreen. It's going to take a lot more plays for me to know that for sure, but I think the things that might keep it from that are the fiddliness to some of the game rules and the kind of the interconnectivity of the design, and the way that could be a barrier for some levels of gamer. And then just in general, the sort of busyness of the board. But those are all pretty minor quibbles, and I think I would have to have quite a fantastic collection of medium heavy and heavy games to want to push this one out. I would have to have so many games that play so well, that also integrate theme in a way that's really natural and kind of flows well, that they'd be so much better than this game that I would get rid of this game. So that's unlikely. This game, its strengths are really strong. The mechanical systems are really good and chunky and create a lot of good decisions. So the fact that the theme is a little bit in this one, it's not even a big deal for me. So right now, in a first impressions video, if I had to give you a score and just throw one out there right now, I'm going to put this one at an 8.5. Now, by the time I get around to doing a full teach and review, that likely will change. It may or may not. I mean, the things that I've been saying about this, I don't think it will change that much. But I could see it going up to a 9, down to an 8, maybe down to a 7.5. I don't really see it going below like a 7.5 unless I start to feel that the game is strategically broken, and that seems unlikely. So I'm going to say an 8.5 right now, with the possibility for it to go up or down half a point to a point. And I'm really looking forward to getting the game to the table again and playing it more. It's just really enjoyable and a chunky, fun, medium heavy Euro. So thank you very much for spending some time with me. I hope I helped you make a decision on whether Merv is a good game for you or not. In terms of what's coming next from me, the next first impressions you will see will be for Kanban EV. That is a video that I probably won't get up until the weekend, or maybe shortly after the weekend, as I will be out of town this week. And finally, just briefly to talk about why I'm kind of hitting some bullet points more in these first impressions video. I recently did a video for my May games of the month that included Merchant's Cove. That is a game that I think has gotten a lot of overly negative reviews from some very prolific game reviewers. Now, it's fine. Everybody can give any game any review they want, but I've noticed a trend with Merchant's Cove, which is that it seems a lot of reviewers were maybe not exploring or playing with all of the components in game in that before they were doing the review. Now, it's one thing for me to do that in a first impressions video where I'm saying, hey, I've only played this game a couple times. Here are my thoughts at this point. I'm not doing a full teaching review. But I think the line there for some content reviewers gets fuzzy, and sometimes there are teaching reviews or just reviews going out where people have only played the game a few times and they maybe haven't seen all they really need to see from the game, either in gameplay itself or just in breadth of kind of components and stuff to really do a full review. And I don't really have an issue with any one person giving an honest, review. It's just when a lot of reviewers are doing that and a game that is maybe positioned to be more of an evergreen. So maybe it's a lighter game, which is what happened with Merchant's Cove, that has all of this content that can help it have really long legs. And then you have a bunch of reviewers coming in a quick, review schedule who are kind of panning the game for being too light, panning it for having variable player powers because they think it makes it too heavy and too complicated to teach, and then also kind of not acknowledging all of the content. So in my opinion, a game like Merchant's Cove is really going to be good for people who want to play it a lot, maybe family gamers who want to go out and buy one game, and maybe they're going to splurge a little bit for Merchant's Cove. Maybe they're going to pay twice what they'd pay for another game with the idea that it has so much more content. It's a game that they're going to be able to come back over and over for years and years with hundreds of plays, with all of this variable player ability, the different boards, and just lots and lots of content. So it seemed to me that that was something that a lot of reviewers were missing and wasn't being reflected in their score. And I noticed that all of these reviewers coming together, they started to paint Merchant's Cove as a game that was too light for heavier gamers and wouldn't satisfy them, but it simultaneously was too heavy and had too many choices for lighter and family gamers. And I think the net end of all these reviews is it was kind of keeping both types of gamer away from Merchant's Cove, which is unfortunate because I think Merchant's Cove has been designed for lighter gamers, not for the Root audience, because it does have variable player powers like Root, but it's designed in a much different way. And I'm a little worried that the audience for Merchant's Cove is not going to discover Merchant's Cove because some of these board game reviewers kind of like taken together, with many similar reviews are scaring people away from it. And I think it's something that board game content creators need to be aware of for their audience or just the audience out there. And so I wanted to make my first impressions videos a little more complete so that even if you're seeing this video when the game is just hit and I've only played it a few times and I've communicated to you what I like about it, I wanted to be able to hit some of those points that you may be looking for in terms of value for the money, how the different player counts play or how I think they do, the time involved, art, design, all that kind of stuff, the stuff that I just talked about. I think it's going to be valuable for me to have that even in a first impressions video, so I'm now going to be including that. But also it's very, very important in a full teaching review so that you can get all the information that you may be looking for in addition to what I thought of it, stream of consciousness, and if I like the game. So at least for the time being, you're going to see those bullet points in the first impressions videos. When I do the teaching reviews, the full ones later on, I'll probably be going into even more detail with those, and I will be doing a literal full teach of the game. But for now, I wanted to get that information out there so that people seeing my videos, even and especially when they're first impressions videos, will have more to go on about the game other than just me going, I played it, I like it. So this gives you a little bit more food for thought. Anyway, you will see that in my future first impressions videos as well, as long as I can kind of keep them from becoming too long. And I think I can, although this one may be running a little bit longer as I'm explaining all of this as well. So now I'm done with that. If you wanted to hear all this, it was at the end. So once again, thank you. Have a great gaming week, and I will see you soon in my next video. If you haven't seen my just published early June 2021 Kickstarter update, go check that out, and then be looking for my Kanban EV first impressions video in about a week's time. All right, take care. Happy gaming. See you soon.